Reality reset. Recently, Dr. Kapil Patsaria was travelling from Gwalior to New Delhi on board the Vande Bharat Express train. His seat was in the C7 compartment, and when he reached the platform to board the train, he noticed two coaches between compartments C7 and C6. These were named E1 and E2. After the train arrived at the platform, he boarded it and took his seat in C7. A few minutes later, the ticket checker came and verified his ticket, and shortly after this, the catering service arrived and he asked for food. However, they refused to provide any, claiming that he had not booked any. He was certain he had booked food, but decided there must have been some mistake, so didn't worry about it. After reaching Agra station, most of the passengers disembarked from the train compartment. Kapil was comfortably seated when a passenger approached him and asked him to vacate the seat, claiming it was his. Kapil refused to get up, insisting that he was in his assigned seat. This led to a small argument, whereby the stranger informed him that he was in the wrong compartment, C6 instead of C7. Kapil countered his claim by stating that he had boarded the correct compartment, C7, and that the ticket checker had already confirmed his ticket. In addition to this, the display board both inside and outside the train, as well as on the platform, clearly indicated C7. Kapil related that suddenly all the other passengers started shouting at him, accusing him of being in the wrong compartment. They insisted he look at the display board, and to his surprise, it now displayed signage indicating that it was the C6 compartment. Kapil felt shocked and that something must be wrong. However, he silently got up from his seat and started to move towards the C7 compartment. With his awareness from his earlier observation that there were two extra coaches between the designated compartments, he expected to cross through two compartments to reach C7 from C6. However, while making his way towards C7 with his luggage, he noticed something strange. This time, the C7 compartment was directly adjacent to the C6 compartment, and the two extra coaches were completely gone. He was again utterly shocked by this sudden change, and had no idea what had just happened. With no other option, he took his seat in the C7 compartment. After a few minutes, the ticket checker reappeared and asked him to show his ticket. Again, Kapil displayed it to him. However, this time, the ticket collector expressed disbelief and stated that he could not have boarded the train at Gwalior. Kapil reminded him that he had checked his ticket earlier and questioned how it was possible for him to claim that he had not boarded the train. This strange incident that occurred during Kapil's journey became even stranger upon reaching his destination of Delhi. He checked the train again from the outside, and there were no extra coaches between compartments C6 and C7. Equally, it would have been impossible for coaches to have been added or removed during his journey. He remains convinced that he switched from one similar dimension to another that day, and also troubled by the unnerving incident. He firmly believes that there are other people who might have experienced these glitches in the fabric of our reality. Flight back in time. While this account is well documented, Jody Harnish met the man involved, former astronaut Deke Slayton, during his lifetime, and therefore loved to hear about his involvement in the incident. It was witnessed by many that on June 13, 1993, a small plane was causing problems at John Wayne Airport in Orange County, California. The plane was flying low over the houses, and commercial pilots were reporting that it was not just a nuisance, but dangerously getting in the way. The airport was receiving a lot of calls about the rogue plane, which wasn't responding to air traffic control, and the callers all gave the same ID number for the plane. The plane was traced to Deke Slayton, a former US Air Force pilot, aeronautical engineer and test pilot, who was selected as one of the original NASA Mercury 7 astronauts and also helped develop the space shuttle. Despite his credentials, this behaviour was considered beyond the pale, and the Federal Aviation Administration sent him a letter to say it wasn't going to tolerate such unauthorised flights. The FAA was to receive a reply from Deke Slayton's wife, who wanted to know what kind of sick joke they were playing. At the time of this event, Deke Slayton was dying of brain cancer at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle. His plane was on display in a museum, and the engine had been removed, and so there was no way Deke Slayton was flying his plane around John Wayne Airport. But all the witnesses claimed otherwise. The much confirmed sighting was as if he had simply revisited an earlier, happier time in a perhaps less crowded sky in his comfort zone of solo flight. Disaster revisited. Nick Ainsworth received this personal account from his uncle, who was a retired sailor and used to work on board the Great Lakes freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson. The massive cargo ship would haul iron ore and limestone across the Great Lakes region of North America. One day, in November 2007, at around 7 p.m, the ship was crossing Lake Superior on its way to Cleveland, Ohio, when the crew started receiving distress calls on their radio. The unknown vessel sending the calls was claiming to be the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald famously sank on November 10, 1975, in a high storm, taking all 29 crew members with it. Coincidentally, the SS Arthur M. Anderson is known for having been the last ship to be in contact with the lake freighter before the tragic occurrence. Nick's uncle said that at first the crew thought that all the calls were some kind of distasteful prank. That is, until they checked the radar and found that there were no other ships around for at least 70 nautical miles. The range on the ship's radios is only 60 nautical miles. He said that the panicking voice they heard from the radio described a heavy storm and high winds, and declared that the ship's crew were having a hard time holding their own. Nick's uncle said that you could hear true fear in the man's voice over the radio. But the strange thing was, there was currently no storm at all. In fact, the water was calm and the night was clear. Nick's uncle described that around 8 p.m, the distress calls on the radio came to an abrupt stop, leaving the whole room in a terrifying silence. For a full hour, his crew had listened to the horrifying crisis unfold on the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, which then came to a sudden end. The radio stayed quiet for the rest of the night, but nobody was able to sleep as they were all so unnerved by what they had just witnessed. They were well aware of a kind of ironic synchronicity in this event. This is given that not only was the ship his uncle was on, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, the sister ship to the Edmund Fitzgerald, but it was also the last ship to make contact with the Edmund Fitzgerald in 1975 when she sank. Nick queries whether his uncle and his shipmates may have actually made contact with the ghosts of the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald, or if there could be another explanation for this occurrence, such as a time slip back to that devastating event. It is definitely one of the most chilling accounts he's ever heard. Eerie footage. Rob, in Adelaide, South Australia, still remembers this strange event which occurred around 1993. He and a friend had returned to her home in the evening after they had both attended a presentation. This was in the day of VHS videos, and Rob had recorded some footage on a home video that he wanted her to see. He began trying to line up the video at the right spot while she was in another room. The part that started playing was home video footage of his young son playing at home, something that he had shot a few years earlier and was familiar with. However, suddenly the video changed, and what was being shown was a private jet being towed into a large hangar. He was shocked and perplexed by the visuals, as he had never been in a situation to video this. He called out to his friend to come and have a look at the footage as the moving images continued. The plane was eventually towed alongside where the camera was filming from. The plane stopped, and the camera then filmed the door of the plane opening up, still appearing not only unfamiliar but quite bizarre. Rather than the usual plane door, this was one that opened upwards, with a smaller lower section opening downwards that also contained fold-out stairs. By this time, Rob's mind was feeling completely confused as he wondered what on earth was going on. Then that piece of footage stopped and the continuing images of his son played. Rob felt a little unhinged as he continued to tell his friend that he didn't film this. He quickly rewound the video, finding the original recording of his son playing. However, this time it just continued as normal. The segment showing the strange plane was missing, again completely inexplicable. Now they were both astounded and perplexed. His friend was to have a strange reaction as quite a few years later he started to ask her, "Do you remember that night when we watched that video?" And she cut him off and said she didn't want to talk about it. To this day, Rob can still see that plane footage in his mind 30 years later. The experience was so creepy that he's only ever told 2 other people about the event. They believed him whilst finding it hard to believe, and so the redeeming fact was that he was able to say that he wasn't alone or hallucinating, that a friend witnessed it with him. Perhaps a glimpse of something happening in another time dimension. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. Justine. In the summer of 1985, Justine and her mother decided to visit the Crescent Hotel in the historic district of Eureka Springs, which is located in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas in the US. Ironically, the hotel has always been known for ghosts in what was built as a resort town in the late 1800s. The town has an area of Victorian-era grand hotels, theatres and a bathhouse, all built around the city's natural springs where the ghosts are said to gravitate. The Crescent Hotel, known to be one of America's most haunted places, is on the upper left turn-off of the main road, but Justine and her mum mistakenly took the other turn-off to the right. There are shops down in that direction as well, so they hadn't realised that they were heading down the wrong road. Although they missed out on visiting the Crescent, they still had quite the day out. Outside one of the shops they passed was a man in a white shirt, suspenders and brown trousers who was building the wooden frame for window panes by hand. He waved at Justine and her mum and went on with his work. They didn't think anything of his appearance because Eureka was at that time an artistic town and attracted many unusual characters who might dress in period clothes. They noticed a shop next door to the man's and went inside. It was summer and they were feeling hot and needing a bathroom. The ambience of the shop and the shop lady herself were friendly enough, although something seemed odd. Justine went to the bathroom while her mum chatted with the lady and ordered a lemonade. It needs to be kept in mind that Eureka is a bit of a tourist trap where things are usually sold at inflated prices, but the lemonade was only 25 cents. The 3 women talked for a while until Justine's mum had finished her lemonade. The shop lady then said to them, "I want you to see my Christmas display from last year." She pulled out a very old-looking photograph of her shop with a cute doll display in the window. In the photograph, cars from the 1930s were parked in front of the shop. Justine explains that this was not a mock-up retro photo, but an actual print from the 1930s. She could tell by the type of paper it was printed on. She comments that it was hard to get away from the lady, as perhaps she hadn't had visitors for a long time, a very long time. Justine and her mum finally did leave and continued walking down the wrong road for quite a while. However, they finally turned to go home as it became too late and they were too tired to walk up the hill to the Crescent Hotel by that point. Chillingly, as they passed by the shop again, it was closed and looked like it had been closed for years. They were so freaked out by this event, they took showers when they got home and vowed that they would not be going down that road again. Not in this lifetime anyway. Glenn believes that he experienced a possible time slip when he was just turned 8 years old. The year was 1981, when he was in Year 2 at Dubbo North Primary School in New South Wales, Australia. The school year had started out normally, but about halfway through he had developed symptoms for which his mother took him to the doctor, who discovered that he had nephritis, an infection of the kidneys which required hospitalisation. He was immediately admitted to the children's ward at the Dubbo Base Hospital. The ward was the oldest and the original part of the hospital, built in the late 1800s. Glenn remembers a lot about his 6-week stay there, and his memories are vivid as it was quite traumatising as a child because of the painful blood tests and needles he had to have daily. But the aspect that always stood out to him were the nurses. They were very caring and kind to him, often attending to him late at night and early in the mornings, and during the day often patrolling around the ward, which was a large open hall type building. He remembers their uniforms and the nurses' hats that they wore, and he was always curious about the stars on the hats and what they meant. He noticed that some hats had more stars than others, while some were full stars and others were half stars. After about 4 weeks, Glenn was moved out into a new annex area attached to the ward, and he never saw the nurses with the stars in this area. Instead, they wore a uniform that was more modern for the time and without the hat. Finally, after weeks of treatment, he was discharged and was fully recovered a few months later. This is where things get interesting. Glenn often told people about his stay in the children's ward and the nurses with the stars on their hats as he grew up. Later, he would tell his wife and 2 oldest children about the experience. Now, fast forward to 2003. Glenn had left Dubbo about a decade before and was back visiting relatives with his wife and 3 children when his youngest daughter, aged 1, suffered a severe infection and had to be treated at Dubbo Base Hospital. After many hours there consulting doctors, she was seen by an older nurse to whom Glenn remarked that he had been a patient there in 1981. He told her that he remembered the nurses and their uniforms, that they were wearing hats with stars on them. The nurse looked at him perplexed and said that she had worked there for 32 years, starting in 1970, and never seen nurses wearing this uniform. Glenn asked if maybe her recollection was wrong, or whether perhaps she may have mixed up the years she started, and she became somewhat agitated with a firm no, so he left it at that. Many years later, in around 2021, he was looking at the Dubbo Memories page when photographs of nurses were posted from 1967, where they were wearing the uniform with stars on the hat that he remembers. Intrigued, on further investigation, he couldn't find this uniform past the late 1960s or the ranking system using the stars, showing experience and who was in charge before 1958. He still feels bewildered as to whether he was cared for by ghost nurses or had experienced a time slip during those 4 weeks in the children's ward. Having been a child, everything in the ward looked old, but that still did not explain the long superseded uniforms and hats with stars. Marie Firth's family loved to take walks in the summer, and one Sunday she and her mum decided to do just that. Living in Southampton in England, their walk, as they talked, took them to Queen's Terrace, which is opposite a small park area and Dockgate 4. Marie points out, for reasons that will be explained, that Southampton is a very busy port, both for containers and cruise ships, so the main road opposite Queen's Terrace was always full of noisy lorries and cars 7 days a week. It was never deserted or quiet. As she and her mother turned right into Queen's Terrace, an elegant row of houses, of which some are now offices, came into view. They had elegant curved 18th century bay windows on the second floor, and on passing the first one, they heard beautiful harpsichord playing. They both stopped, looked up to the bay window, which was half open, and could see a man's head and body bobbing about as he was playing. At that time, Marie failed to notice there were no traffic sounds whatsoever, just deathly silence and the sound of his playing. They listened to him for a few minutes and discussed how good he was, then decided to continue their walk, still oblivious to the lack of traffic, which they later recalled. They got to the end of Queen's Terrace, then decided to walk back and again listen to the man play, before making their way home. It only took a couple of minutes to walk back, and they were shocked. Not only was the man not there, the window was boarded up with planks of wood and a for rent sign outside. Marie states that even if someone had worked like a demon to board up the window, it would have been impossible for them not to have heard the hammering and banging. They walked home discussing the strange events and realised later that they were a time slip back to the 18th century, when the house was probably the man's home. If Marie had been on her own, she could have questioned her perceptions, but her mother witnessed all this with her. Aidan. Aidan still wonders if he lost 6 minutes from his life. He is 22 years of age and a full-time university student studying history and philosophy, and residing in Runcorn in the northwest of Merseyside, England. What happened to him one night still perplexes him, as he had never experienced anything like it, nor do his rational faculties provide him with any sufficient explanation. The strange occurrence still haunts and astounds him as an indescribable phenomenon that he'd only heard in tales, anecdotes and stories from others. It was the 17th of December 2022, and a cold and wintry evening when he had the night to himself. Aidan decided to read a book and was also installing GTA 5 on his Xbox 360 as he wanted to get achievements. As he was reading the book and waiting for his game to install, he checked the time on the Xbox dashboard. It said 11:54 p.m, so he thought to himself, okay, and then left it for approximately another 30 seconds interval, when he then checked the dashboard again. It showed 4 zeros, 0 a.m, midnight. Aidan said to himself, how is this possible, and felt stunned and awed by this bizarre brush with the inexplicable. He knew for a fact that he had fast-forwarded into the future by 6 minutes, although it was only seconds. He immediately told his mum and brother, who did not seem convinced, but Aidan knew what had happened to him, and it still sends shivers down his spine even thinking about it. He states that his family home has a history of paranormal activity, and this experience is no exception, but just adds to the chronology of events. It was eerie to think that that was 6 minutes of his life he will never get back.